So for us, even to begin to understand the role memory plays on the island, to the extent outsiders ever can, would have been impossible were it not for the willingness of people on the ground who are actively engaged in the processes of reconciliation to engage with us. So to all of those people we've had a chance to speak to, we are enormously grateful. And throughout our research, we have been exploring the intersection on the one hand of formal education, that which is imparted through educational institutions, and on the other hand of informal education, which encompasses the narratives consumed through social interaction and mass media. And I think what we see in both of these are that they are at the core of the formation of national identities and inclusive or exclusive collective memories. And in the context of Cyprus, we believe that these are deciding factors in conflict transformation and reconciliation, and have the potential to set peace negotiations or referendums up for either success or for failure. The compilation of this research and the interviews we have conducted, and of course this webinar, we will then be publishing with the support of HasNa in a report that will be coming out in the near future. So with the stage hopefully set, we are then honored to welcome our guests, Sevgul and Haris, for today's discussion. And we hope that all of us can emerge today with a better understanding of the pathways towards reconciliation in Cyprus. We would also like to take the opportunity to thank HasNa for helping us arrange this webinar and for your unwavering support throughout the process. Finally, as a quick matter of housekeeping, this webinar is being broadcast live via Zoom and YouTube. We encourage the audience to partake and to send us questions. If you have questions, you can use the Q&A function on Zoom, comment on YouTube, or direct a tweet with your question to @HasNa Inc. And we will do our best to get to them in a designated Q&A portion towards the end. I, for one, think that is plenty from me. I know that we are all eager to hear from our guests now. So without further ado, I would like to pose to you our first question. I'll direct that to you, Dr. Saltis. In your book, History Education and Conflict Transformation, you pose the question, what is the place of representations of the past and history teaching in reconciliation? How would you like to answer this?
Yeah. Thank you very much. This was an edited volume with some colleagues, social psychologists and professors of history teaching, Professor Mario Carretero and Sabina Gehayis-Clancy, who works in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And what we tried to do there was to capture the whole issue of how collective memory and history teaching structure and influence the way we view the past, the present, intergroup relations, and how we project the future. And in terms of the future, we try to understand this canalization of past, present, future, which is some way defined by the way we position ourselves in the representational field of the Cyprus issue. So it's how we represent the past and how we interpret what happened in Cyprus, who was to blame for coming up to this point, who were the main actors, who were involved in the problem, who were, who engineered or provoked some events. So all this kind of interpretation is coupled with a number of important social psychological variables that we all know from research in mainstream social psychology, like threats, realistic and symbolic threats, perspective taking, contact, the existence and the quality of intergroup contact. They all relate in a way that somehow forms and projects the wished for future. So in that sense, the role, as you suggested earlier, is crucial, because from the position we stand every time, the perspective we take on the past, we project a relevant future. So I would say that it's a very important topic of investigation. And we were very happy actually to see that it was very well received, that edited volume, because it had 140,000 downloads around the world. So we are very happy to see that people are looking for this interdisciplinary approach that combines social psychological insights with history teaching, and we think that's a kind of a way forward in better understanding conflicts and post-conflict settings around the world.
Thank you. So next question I would like to direct to you, Sevgul. So following up with these idea of perspectives of the past and projections of the future, you retrieved accounts from both communities and have given voices to those that were without them prior. You have talked about these zones of silence and the importance of breaking them. Could you please expand on these and how this helps pave a path towards reconciliation?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to John and to you and to HasNa and to Georgetown University for inviting me as a speaker. In fact, I had visited Mrs. Nevzer back in 2008 at her home. She had come. I had received the International Courage in Journalism Award, and she had come to one of the ceremonies in the US, and she had invited me to breakfast, and that's how I got to know her. But I knew HasNa because HasNa did a lot of work when, especially with the youth who did not have a chance to mix. It was very, very important to break the zones of silence with the youth, particularly with the youth, because they had no common memories. They were born after 74, and they had no common life together. Their families lived separately in their respective, let's say, zones, north and south, because Cyprus is partitioned into north and south. So HasNa's work was precious because it was taking students, still doing this actually, HasNa, it still continues this program for youth, and taking them to the US for about a month, I think, and putting them in pairs to live with an American family, but during the daytime having workshops with all of them. So this was very, very powerful for them to get to know someone, to break down the taboos. Because what happened was, how did these zones of silence were produced? They were produced by the ruling elites in both communities, and because they want each community to see themselves as the only victim of the conflict. And there has been an ongoing victimization process throughout our recent history, from the 50s, from the 60s, from the 70s. Each side holds a piece of the puzzle in their own hand, and with the help of the media and education, and for the Greek Cypriots, the church, because Turkish Cypriots are very, very secular. They don't, they're not religious. They are secular people, so we don't have that sort of impact, but we have other impacts. So they just cry for their own pain. What I try to do, since I've been a journalist for the past 40 years, and I have always tried to break taboos. I have always tried to include the other communities, not just my own community. Even when checkpoints were firmly closed and there were no crossings, I would try to cross. I would try to take permission and interview also Greek Cypriot youth as well as Turkish Cypriot youth. Teachers, women NGOs, whatever. I mean, I try to show a connection that they are human. So when I began working on the issue of missing persons, it was like an earthquake in both our communities because they didn't know. Greek Cypriots didn't know that Turkish Cypriot missing persons even exist. And Turkish Cypriots didn't know that their own side killed and made people disappear from the other community. It was impossible. What was this information? So it was like a big earthquake. It was had never been written before the way I did it, because I showed the pain of both sides. I tried to stop the victimization process. I was writing, and I'm still writing in both sides, in newspapers. And so everything I write is accessible to both communities. And I try to show that it's not Turkish pain, it's not Greek pain, it's human pain. I try to give humanity to the numbers. I try to show that the people who suffered were ordinary people. They were not killed or disappeared during fighting. They were taken prisoners. They were civilians. They were women. They were children. And this was very sad and shocking, but at the same time, healing time for our communities. I began that process because by breaking the zones of silence, you give space to people to speak and to share what they know, what they lived through. There were villages who had a secret, for instance. One particular village in Karpas, Galatia, they all knew that people were buried in the lake. Greek Cypriots were killed and buried in the lake in retaliation, in parentheses, for the killing of some Turkish Cypriot women and children in another place. But they couldn't speak about it. Their mouths were sealed. They were afraid. They were terrified. So when I created a safe space to break the zone of silence. And I told them, I don't want to know your name. Don't tell me who you are. I don't need to know that. But if you know something that happened in your village, in your neighborhood, in your town, call me and tell me. I will not ask you your name. So in this way, I got thousands and thousands and thousands of calls where people told me stories that they saw as a child. The perpetrators never speak. If you hide a grave of a missing person, you actually hide a crime. And if you hide a crime, you actually hide a criminal, right? So criminals never spoke to me, ever. It was always people, maybe their sons or their neighbors or their cousins, somebody who was a 10-year-old kid who saw something. So this is the way we broke the silence, zones of silence, but in both sides. I was doing it in both sides. This was very unique journalism in Cyprus that had never been done before. Therefore, of course, you had to pay, right? It has a price. And the price was, of course, a lot of enemies. Those killers who were alive, they got very upset in both sides. And they started threatening me in both sides. So I had to learn how to deal with that. I had to devise ways to feel safe enough to continue. And how I did that, I put every single thread in print. I printed it. I wrote about it. I didn't try to hide it. I have this wonderful friend in Greece. She's a peace activist, and she's one of the founders of Win Peace, called Fotini Sioanu. And she had gone through the junta regime, and she knew things. Because history of Greece is also very, very, very sad. It's a struggle for democracy. And she could understand what I was trying to do. And she told me, Sevgul, never back up. Always be in the forefront. Because if you back up and they sense you're afraid, they will come more to push you in a corner. So never, always. So, I mean, this helped me. A lot of my readers, the real power of breaking the zones of silence was the power of my readers from both sides, because my readers are very, very loyal. Either they read everything I write or they don't read me. I mean, there's no in between. It's not like a hobby, because they follow and they try to contribute. So in this way, we covered a lot of ground, not just about killings and rapes that was never spoken of, but also about stories of friendship, how people saved each other. It's also a very, very big taboo. You cannot imagine how big a taboo. A Turkish Cypriot saved a group of 80 Greek Cypriots, and his wife is still terrified to admit this. I mean, they attacked me when I wrote about this. The whole family attacked me, except the sister tried to help me. But I mean, still a very big taboo. A lot of people have been saved. Why? Because we still don't have an infrastructure for peace in Cyprus. Nobody supports peace. Nobody supports reconciliation. There is absolutely no space for the real Cypriots to survive on this land. They force you to choose a side. They tell you you are either Turkish Cypriot or Greek Cypriot. Choose your side. I refuse to choose a side. I include both because this is Cyprus and I'm a Cypriot, and I need to understand and give space to the pain and happiness and joy and whatever they feel of all the communities. It's not just Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot. We have Armenian Cypriots, Maronite Cypriots, Latin Cypriots. So, I mean, we have a variety, but we don't have an infrastructure to support. So it's extremely difficult to do any reconciliation work in Cyprus that touch the hearts of the people. I mean, you can do small projects and simple things that don't really touch the society. It's okay with the regime on both sides. But if you touch their hearts, they see it as dangerous and they try to shut you down and whatever. I should stop, right? To give the chance for other questions.
Yeah, no, it's all right. We'll definitely get back to some of the ideas you're talking about. But yeah, Nevzer, she's the founder of HasNa. For those of you who don't know, Nevzer Stacy is the founder of HasNa, has been really involved in projects in Cyprus since 1998 when she founded the organization. And the project that Sevgül was referring to is the Cyprus Friendship Program is how it was started under HasNa. And now it has come to take on its own identity years later. It's now become Creating Friendships for Peace. I would encourage you to look it up. It's still the same exchange program between Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots coming to the United States. And they've expanded their programming to include Israeli and Palestinian youth as well recently. So that's a little background there. But yeah, getting back to your point about victimization and the creation of identities, being forced to choose a side, I'd like to turn this to you, Haris. This question is for you. So in your book, you talk about dangerous memories that more or less challenge or disrupt essentialized and rooted identities. So for example, by calling for solidarity with the enemy or the other on the basis of common human suffering. And I was just wondering if you could sort of expand on that idea and sort of explain what sort of shape these so-called dangerous memories can take.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that particular chapter was written by a colleague, Michalinos Zembilas, and I think Hakan Karahasan, who is a Turkish Cypriot educator. And they both tried to discuss this issue of dangerous memories. Well, dangerous memories is the kind of missing part of history that if we find out about, then our identity becomes somehow threatened and the whole master narrative of the nation that is usually one-sided and invests on what we call in social psychology competitive victimhood. So the idea that we are the victims and we are more victims than the others, this whole structure of the narrative starts to collapse. So in that sense, that's a dangerous memory. And what Sevgül described earlier is exactly that. I mean, I feel very honored to be with Sevgül because she's, awarded peace builder and one of the avant-garde in this effort to reunite Cyprus. So I think this interface of activism with theoretical analysis is very important to do work in Cyprus. And I think the point here is that what Sevgül all these years is doing through investigative journalism, unearthing these white pages of history, these silences, should actually come to be known in both communities in a more formal way, because what happens now is that our history textbooks in both the Greek Cypriot community and the Turkish Cypriot community promote this one-sided form of victimization and competitive victimhood. So we know very well what the others did on our community, how they misbehaved and treated our community in a very bad manner, but we never know what our community, how badly our community treated the other community. So in a sense, by discovering all these pieces of the puzzle that Sevgül talked about that are very strategically hidden from each community's view, we will be in a position to offer a more integrated and more comprehensive understanding of the history of Cyprus. I have a colleague at the University of Cyprus, Yannis Papadakis, who studied the way history textbooks present the master narrative in both communities. And he usually says that in Cyprus, the history of Cyprus has actually never been written. I would agree with that, but recently we actually had a book that describes at least the last 50 years of the Cyprus issue, which is the book by another colleague, who is now an MP, a Euro MP, Niaziki Zilyurek, who actually, I think, made this brave and huge step in writing the history of Cyprus. So you can see there the two perspectives coming together. And then once you read that book, you really come to realize that we have been victims of propaganda in our school systems for all these so many years in both communities. So yeah, I mean, what needs to be done is obviously to have people like Sevgül and colleagues like Andreas Paraschos in the Greek Cypriot community who do similar work to Sevgül, to sit together with historians and history teachers and academics who study the role of collective memory in post-conflict settings, and write new history textbooks that will somehow leave behind all these silences and zones of silences and face, the dangerous memories that we need to face to have a future on this island.
Yeah, thank you very much for that answer. And this is going to pivot me back to Sevgül. So it was our pleasure. We wanted to get somebody such as you, Haris, who is more, has been really involved in the research and the theoretical applications, and then also a practitioner such as you, Sevgül. Mm-hmm. So, and coming into that, discussing about the role of education. So, Sevgül, you as a journalist and somebody active in the media are someone who's an informal educator. So what role do you think that the media plays in creating or supporting, deconstructing bicommunal national identities?
Yes, the media, of course, generally follows the mainstream politics, but there's always alternatives. So, I mean, they also, it depends on the journalist himself or herself, who would really feel the need to do that. Unfortunately, we didn't have many examples in the past, but nowadays with the alternative media, let's say the social media, the Facebook, we have absolutely more opportunities to change the understandings and visions and practices. And like at the moment, because of the coronavirus, crossings have virtually stopped between the two sides. It's very, very, very difficult. But on Facebook, there is tens of groups who discuss, who get together for photography or for hobbies, or there are some groups which people try to prove a point against each other from the other community, but there are groups with better understanding and who can, and even in those groups, there are people who stand up for you. And this is very, very important. And let us not just think of media as print media, but also we have now web TV, we have blogs, we have podcasts. A lot is going on. But unfortunately, as I pointed out before, there has been absolutely no infrastructure to support peace building in Cyprus. Haris can tell you more. The Association for Historical Dialogue and Research, AHDR, they wrote a series of books to be used in schools, which were really, really wonderful and written really well. We also helped to write a book on missing for the teachers. It was a teacher's guidebook, how to discuss this very sensitive issue in the classroom. What sort of exercises should there be? And there were books of common children games, or about our only divided city in Europe, Nicosia, the capital. But nobody picked up these books. I mean, on either side. We couldn't distribute these in schools, even though the two leaders went to Home for Cooperation, where AHDR is it's a seat headquarters. They drank coffee, they opened, they made talks, and I said to one of my friends, if I was you, I would just take these books and put in front of them and tell them, look, I mean, you come here, you drink coffee, you speak to each other, but you don't pick up these books that would change, because education is the most important thing. We have some very basic differences with education between the Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot community. Our teachers have, throughout the ages, have been the most progressive section of society. And they were like leaders of civil society. And they were always in the forefront for peace and democracy, for the struggle. Whereas in the Greek Cypriot community, they have been more conservative, more preserved. And also we have the influence of the church, according to one of my dear friends, Christina Valanidou, who studied the Greek Cypriot education system. And I interviewed her recently, last year. She says that the Greek Cypriot education system did not change in the past 200 years. Can you imagine that? In the Turkish Cypriot community, during the Progressive Party's rule, let's say, they tried to change education and they tried to rewrite history books. And there was a lot of reaction from the conservatives. And as soon as the government changed, they threw away those books and they rewrote the history books. So, I mean, there is no infrastructure to help people to reconcile. This we need to work on, I believe.
Yes, thank you. I mean, these are ideas that have come up again and again in our interviews. People have talked about the AHDR, so we are familiar with their work. But I was wondering, Haris, if you could speak to, because this difference between the educational system in the Greek community and the Turkish community is something that like I said, has come up in other conversations. Is this a difference you see? And is this a difference that is then, do you see this as further expanded on in media as well? Or you can take that question any direction you like.
Well, thank you. I would first like to make a small comment on Sevgül's comment about infrastructure. I think I would say there are some infrastructures for peace, but Sevgül is right in the sense that I think they have not yet penetrated the way history is taught in schools, in the formal educational system. And this is because I will explain various reasons for that. So I would say I would partly agree with the comment on infrastructures, because yes, you have some NGOs like the Association for Historical Dialogue and Research since 2003, who have produced material, who have sent their material, which is multi-perspective and includes information about the missing, and Sevgül, I remember, helped in that, writing those books and all other topics, some of them more sensitive, some of them less sensitive. But these books, in cooperation with the Council of Europe, have been sent to the libraries of the schools across the divide, but they have not been incorporated yet in a functional way in the everyday teaching of the school. So they are there if somebody wants to go and find them, but they have not been made functional part of the curriculum. That's one thing. The other, I would totally agree that we would need some kind of infrastructure like a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. I think Sevgül might agree with me, maybe we can discuss about that, which is now lacking in Cyprus, because that kind of structure would allow people who have been victimized or perpetrators to come and make statements about what happened in the past and give information in a more structured way. On the other hand, we have CMP, the Committee for the Missing Person, who is doing the investigative work of, finding the people who are missing and who are buried in places where nobody thought they would be found, etc. So that brings some comfort to the relatives of the people, but the knowledge gained there has not been, made public and has not been used in the direction of a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. So that's another structural part of the puzzle missing that goes in the direction that Sevgül was talking about. Then we have a whole series of infrastructures which we call the bicommunal technical committees, which have been set up since 2008. Some of them work on health, some of them work on issues of security and crime, some of them work on the environment, some of them work on on the economy, some, so we have different committees, and the last one to be established was the committee, the Bicommunal Committee on Education. I happen to be part of that committee, and I know a lot of colleagues who have worked with the Association for Historical Dialogue and Research who are now part of that committee. And that committee actually took the effort one level up, in the sense that it was appointed by the two leaders, and suggestions by that committee could be applied as confidence building measures with the formal support of the two leaders. And one of the major achievements of that committee was the establishment of a contact scheme called Imagine at the Home for Cooperation in the opposite Lydra Palace in the middle of Nicosia UN buffer zone, where students, elementary and high school students, have the chance to go there and meet and discuss with students from the other community in school time, during formal school time. So educators also have the chance to meet each other. So that's a great step. But that also shows that the other, major task that this committee should have achieved and has not achieved is the rewriting of history textbooks. And that again goes in the direction that Sevgil was talking about. So the committees were essentially discouraged from the day one of their workings to engage in rewriting history textbooks. So that was considered by the two leaders as too sensitive to touch upon, that might actually have boomerang effects, come to become a symbolic threat for people, to get the reactions and cancel the whole effort. So it went in promoting contact, but not revising the master narratives, which is a great problem. But still, I would try to see some small, some small steps, but important steps that have been taken. But I would still like to see much more happening. There was another point. I will quickly, so I don't spend much more time on that. I agree with Sevgil that the role of educators is a bit asymmetric in the two communities, in the sense that the Turkish Cypriot teachers have always been at the forefront of the struggle for reunification, but the Greek Cypriots have been more reserved. I think one of the reasons for that is the usual discourse that comes from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Greek Cypriot community, which is that we need to avoid actions and activities that would somehow indirectly suggest that in the north a normal state is functioning, because the north is not recognized internationally. So in the sense that they would discourage collaboration between institutions that have been established after 1974 in the north. So if it's a trade union that was established in the north before 1974, that's okay for the Ministry of Education of the Republic of Cyprus. If it's a trade union that was established after that, that's not okay. So there is a minefield of what it's okay and not okay to do from the Ministry of Affairs in the Greek Cypriot community. So it doesn't give a sense that we're dealing with a recognized state. But this is also reflected at the psychological level in the minds of many people who might decide, for example, not to choose to the north, not to cross to the north. So we know from research, because we have studied a lot the role of intergroup contact in Cyprus with colleagues like Hussein Chakal, Denis Yücel, and we have written papers on that where we show very clearly the positive and beneficial effects of contact in reducing prejudice. But at the same time, we see that there is about 1/3 of Greek Cypriots who have never crossed to the north. And why is that? If you go and interview people, a lot of them will pivot around the discourse of recognition, and they would say, I don't want to financially support a non-recognized state. I don't want to visit my place as a tourist. Maybe I'm an internally displaced person. I don't want to. That's too emotional for me. So there is a number of reasons that make Greek Cypriots not cross to the north, which is not the case in the Turkish Cypriot community. Crossing is not stigmatized, let's put it that way. So you need to understand this asymmetry of recognition and non-recognition that I think makes the Greek Cypriot community sometimes more reluctant to engage, mostly with institutions in the north, but it actually also reflects at the individual level for people who usually carry a lot of prejudice and stereotypes.
All right, thank you. So yeah, we're going to consolidate some of our questions here. We're coming up to Q&A, so please, everybody watching, use the Q&A feature, submit your questions. We'll leave some time at the end to get to them. But so yeah, piggybacking off of what you were just talking about when it comes to the asymmetrical recognition of the North, that can be at the governmental level or the institutional level, I suppose, and then also bleed down to the individual level as well. This question has to do with representation and intergroup trust. So what do you think that the role of representation and intergroup trust could be in promoting a resolution in Cyprus, whether it's through the textbooks or in the media? And I'll leave this to either one of you to sort of make a comment.
Yeah, maybe Sergio wants to go first.
No, you go first and I continue.
Okay, thank you. Well, you know, representation is the result of a socialization process. So education plays the major role in the way we are taught through history textbooks. But then you have the role of parents and teachers, and you have the role of the community and the media and how they depict and represent the Cyprus issue and the political discourse around it. So it's a slow process that builds up a number of understandings and representations about the past and the present and the future, and they all somehow form a structure that has their own rationale. So to deconstruct that reified structure, I would say you need a lot of work, not only at the educational system, but also in the media. And I was asked about the media earlier. We have written recently a paper with Maria Vramidou, who works on communications. And what we did there is that we demonstrated the way two of the major newspaper outlets in the Greek Cypriot community propagated a certain understanding of the negotiations that were happening 6 months before the Crans-Montana failure. And there you could see one of the newspaper outlets in a very clear, aggressive manner promoting distrust, which is crucial because distrust of both Turkish Cypriots and Turkey would most likely make people not feel safe to vote yes in a possible referendum in the future. So they were, deliberately promoting a lot of fears that, if we go for a solution, the next day maybe we'll have a dissolution of the state. I mean, what happens if that happens? What happens if that happens? So they were very strategic in installing fear in people about what might happen if we go to a solution. The other newspaper was always trying to put the bar up over create red lines, what we should or we should not accept as Greek Cypriots. So in that sense, they were putting the bar too high, and they were thinking that they were in that way strengthening the negotiating position of their own side. But at the same time, I think they were actually undermining the opportunities that if the two leaders would come to an agreed solution, that the people would actually accept that solution. Because once you condition people to think about an ideal solution, that it's actually a maximalist solution that would never come because every solution is the outcome of a compromise, then you actually undermine the possibilities of reaching a positive referendum. So yes, trust is crucial. We know in social psychology it's built from contact, it's built from perspective taking, understanding the other side's point of view, unearthing the silences of history, reducing intergroup anxiety, and all these changing in-group norms, the way that we think others, significant others think about the issue. And that's the major role of schools, actually, because schools form in-group norms. For example, do they support that the students should create friendships with members of the other community or not? Or is this discouraged? And programs like Imagine, they are actually aiming at changing the in-group norms, because by having the official system send circulars and saying that, that's a very nice program that you can attend to at the Home for Cooperation, and you can meet Turkish Cypriot students, that shows what we call in social psychology from all poles theory, support by authorities, which is one of the 4 conditions that maximizes the benefits of intergroup contact in reducing prejudice. So the school climate is important, and the role of leadership there is important. Teachers is important. So I would say we can build trust, but we also need to not only think what different people and institutions and NGOs can do, but also to find ways to build defenses against the negative media and people who are, very determined to undermine any effort for reunification at the same time.
Okay, so
I think I can
continue,
add,
Sabri.
I can build on what Haris said. I would say that what lacks in our school curricula is building empathy and compassion for the others other than yourself. I was writing this book back in 1998. I wrote a handbook for women in politics, how to be successful. And I looked at the examples around the world, and particularly Sigi to the Scandinavian countries, because they are a shining example of what could be done about women in politics and how they can be powerful. It's one of the best in the world that hasn't been surpassed yet. So I found out that in the classroom, I think it was either Sweden or Denmark. I don't remember. I think it was Sweden. So they had separate. They separated the girls and the boys in the classroom, and they had separate lessons. For the girls, they taught public speaking and things like that. And for the boys, they tried to teach empathy. So, I mean, we do not need to rediscover the world, let's say. There are shining examples in the whole world. There is Germany and France, and what they have done in education and how they cooperate. There is the example of Northern Ireland. There is the Balkans. We can look at the Balkans. Balkans, actually, I follow the Balkans very closely. I try, because they show what sort of problems we will encounter in the future if we have an agreement signed by the leaders. They have problems like what to do with the monuments, because some war criminals, according to one community, is a hero in the other community, and they have these monuments. We have the same problem in Cyprus. I mean, they have Grivas Tigenis Avenue in the south, which is very offensive for Turkish Cypriots. And in Karpaz, we have the Bülent Ecevit Bladia, the square, which is very offensive for Greek Cypriots. I mean, what will you do with these? How to deal with these? But we do not need to rediscover America. I mean, if Cyprus has one of the highest levels of education in the world concerning university and masters and doctorates and whatever. So if we sit together, the main thing is goodwill. With goodwill, there are absolutely no problems we cannot solve. I believe in this truly, because I have shown that through the goodwill of my readers, we discovered so many things that were not known before, or were known and were hidden under the carpet. With goodwill of the people, because they were not part of any project. I'm not part of any project. I do this as a humanitarian task. My only income is my very small, modest wage from my newspaper. Nobody pays, and I consciously don't apply for projects for missing things like that, in order so that people don't say, she does it for money. No. So all my readers, thousands of them, help without any payment, without any interest, out of humanity. We must build on humanity. We must have our own agenda. Any subject I have been handling as a journalist, apart from the missing, I always try to seek out what do people from the other communities think. How was the life of the, let's say, Armenian Cypriots? They were living together with Turkish Cypriots. What happened to them? I did series of articles. It was very difficult because minorities in any country, they are very shy, they are very reserved. It's very, very difficult to penetrate and to have them speak freely. I interviewed Maronites, I interviewed Latins, I did multicultural exhibitions of art together with the women from all these communities. I mean, if you have a will, you can create so many things because you start thinking out of the box. That, I think, for me, that's the main thing.
Thank you. And I think we'll try and get one quick Q&A question in. Thank you also, Charis, for being proactive and answering some of the Q&A proactively. Just to pick up on several, you mentioned art. I'll put this to both of you for a brief conclusion. How is the issue of reconciliation represented in mainstream art and cinema? And I have not seen this film, but there is a mention of the film Smuggling a Hendrix from 2018 and how it was received on the island.
And also to jump in there too, there's a question about public spaces, such as monuments too, if you could touch on that as well. Different forms of education.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. I think there are some small steps taken recently, and some people who have been doing this kind of very brave, groundbreaking efforts for many years. So I have in mind now Panikos Chrysanthou, who had produced a number of documentaries about, with the one I remember, the first one I think was with Nia Zikil-Zigurek, called Our Wall, which was what about the division in Cyprus, and then a number of other documentaries about the Green Line, etc. The one you mentioned earlier, Smuggling Hendrix, yeah, I've seen that. It was also quite funny in a way, but at the same time critical of division, because it brought to the surface the surreal situation we live in, where a dog could not cross the checkpoint. So that was quite funny, but at the same time tragic. So that was very good. I'm sure Sevgül will know a number of Turkish Cypriot cinema people and artists who produced this kind of relevant material. I'm now working with one of my students, Hariton Loizou, and a very productive new NGO called Visual Voices, which tries to bring together artists from both communities. And what they do is that they organize that kind of meetings of artists who stay in the Home for Cooperation and other places, join spaces together for some time, and they produce artwork, and then they take them to an exhibition, and then people have the chance to have a look at that. There was a very nice move from the Technical Committee of Culture recently, who, after an initiative of the Turkish Cypriot leader Mustafa Kinci, ex-leader Mustafa Kinci, they returned a number of paintings that were found mostly in Varosha, if I'm not mistaken, and they were returned back to the Greek Cypriot side. And that kind of exhibition was very emotional for many people, and it was a sign of goodwill, and it was a great confidence building measure. And having said about the role of the Technical Committee of Culture, we should never forget, I think one of the most successful, if not the most successful, technical committee, which is of cultural heritage, that has worked through all these years, since 2008, with the great leadership of Takis Hadjidimitriou and Ali Tujai, if I'm not mistaken, who managed to restore so many monuments of cultural heritage, religious places in both communities, and really deconstruct that stereotype that, you know, the other community are barbarians, they are not interested in our cultural heritage, and they don't want to do anything about it. So all these efforts are important steps in building reconciliation from the bottom up, and I'm sure that they are already having great influence in the way people see the other community. Well, I should state here that from research, one of the papers we wrote with Denise Yücel recently, we have documented that comparing research findings from 2007 compared to research findings of 2017, there was a significant betterment of prejudice, and we explained why that could be attributed to both direct and indirect contact that is happening through the open checkpoint since 2003. I'm sorry if I missed any other part of your question. If I did, just, you know, remind me, sorry.
No, I think it's all right. So we're running up on the end of our time. We're past it by 2 minutes, actually. I'm not sure, Sevgül, if you had anything quickly that you wanted to add there, or if I should wrap it up.
Very quickly, I just want to mention what we did voluntarily. I brought together relatives of missing persons and victims of the conflict back in 2006. And they formed this association called Together We Can. And as Together We Can, we did a big exhibition of art at the Goethe Institute on the Green Line in Nicosia, where we worked voluntarily again, without any funding, for 8 months, together with artists from both communities, where they actually sat down together with the relatives of missing and victims of war. We took them around to visit the mass graves in both sides, and they went into the homes of the relatives of missing, and they saw what it meant, because when someone is missing, he's neither dead nor alive, lives in the buffer zone, and it's impossible for anybody to convince relatives of missing that they are dead. They expect them to return, so that they saw that longing, and how they kept the clothes, how they kept the toys, and they painted. And it was a very, very powerful exhibition. And so, I mean, if, as I said, if there is a will, there's always a way to work through difficulties. Nobody promised us heaven on earth. So, I mean, I'm an activist last 40 years. So you can be creative and you can ask help from trade unions and NGOs, and you find a way to survive. That's what I mean. But the main thing is to believe in yourself, to believe in people around you with goodwill, and to do things with goodwill. And we get results. I mean, we showed this many times. Is it mainstream? No, it's not mainstream, but it's a start. It's a role model for the future. And I want to thank you all for patiently listening to me and for inviting me. Thank you.
Yeah, and on that positive and hopeful note, I'll begin to wrap up. So thank you to the Georgetown University's conflict resolution program, where Sigurdur is from. Thank you for approaching us with the idea for this type of project. And then Dr. Haris Psaltis, thank you very much. And of course, Sevgül Uludağ. You will be able to find a recording of this video. It'll be on hasna.org, or it will be on our YouTube channel at HasNa Live Events. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good rest of your evening or afternoon, morning.
Thank you again for the invitation. It was, I hope it was a fruitful discussion, and I hope that the people who followed enjoyed the discussion. Thank you very much.